Strange, but true stories. Tales from the light side, the dark side, and the other side. I'm Steve White. I know I've said this before, but it's good to revisit from time to time. First, collectively, you guys are awesome. The subscribers, the commenters, even the ones who only occasionally stop by. You are all beyond measure, and we truly appreciate you. Since we started this channel, we have asked you to send us your stories, and you responded in great numbers. And one of the cool byproducts is reading a story from someone who decided to come forward with their own paranormal story after hearing someone else's experience on our channel. The stigma of societal pressure removed with the shared experience and, of course, the anonymity we provide with our stories. So it is with our first story today from a young lady who recognized something familiar in one of our earlier videos. Voices down the hall. This is something I don't talk often about. I don't want people to call me crazy or to say that I'm making it up for attention, but I feel safe to share it anonymously with others with open minds. When I was 23 years old, my grandmother, my mother's mother, was diagnosed with cancer. Soon afterward, she experienced a stroke that affected the communication part of her brain. It left her unable to speak properly. Her words would come out sounding foreign, just total gibberish. Even when she concentrated very hard and tried speaking slowly, even simple words would not come out. She could only shake her head for no and nod for yes. Unfortunately, the cancer spread very quickly, and the doctors told us that she only had a few months to live. Refusing to let my grandmother die alone in a nursing home, unable to communicate properly, my mother moved her to our home. I gave up my bedroom for her, and I moved to the living room couch. I helped my mom take care of my grandmother the best I could, but I was never the favorite grandchild and always felt more in the way than anything else. So while my mom took care of her, I tried picking up all the household chores like cleaning and cooking and other things around the house. My room, where my grandmother was slowly dying, was next to the living room. Even though she didn't really make any noise, we kept her door shut at night, mostly so she could get some peace from our noises. A month or so later, when her health was seriously declining and she was totally bedridden, I began to hear noises from her room. These noises were only at night, very late at night. I was always the last one to get to sleep, usually between midnight and 1 o'clock. It was the middle of summer, and even with a loud fan blowing on me, I could still hear noises. And then the voices started. I didn't tell anyone at the time. The hospice nurses always said it's normal for the patient to hear voices towards the end, but I wasn't the patient. At first, I could not make out the words, but I could tell there was more than one voice. And the voices were certainly not my grandmother's, that much was obvious. Now, this wasn't every single night, but it was often. And at first I thought maybe it was just stress, or that I was doing too much of a workload by taking care of everything. I don't know, but one night, after my mom went to bed and had fallen asleep, I was finally able to make out words. It was so weird. I heard what sounded like my mom's voice. It was as if she had just arrived, came through the door and asked, "How's Shirley and the kids?" Another garbled voice answered, and Mom's voice replied, "Good." Now what's so weird is that my mom's name is Shirley. Why would my mom go in there and ask a question about how she's doing? And I knew for a fact it could not possibly be her because she was in bed, and I could hear her sleeping with a slight snore. It was not my grandmother because she couldn't speak, let alone use multiple voices. I wasn't sure what to think at that point. I didn't know if I should be scared or worried or even believe it was really happening. I drifted off to sleep, refusing to walk into that room because I didn't want to see what I thought I was hearing. The next morning, when I woke up, my mom was in the kitchen, and before I said anything, she said, "You know, the weirdest thing happened last night. I would wake up off and on, and I swear I heard my own voice coming from that room as she pointed to my grandmother's bedroom. I immediately started crying because I finally had some validation that I wasn't going crazy. So I told her about the voices that I heard at night, and we talked about it for a bit until I felt better, and then went about the day feeling that we were not alone in the house. Later that night, as I was trying to fall asleep, I heard the voices again, just as loud as ever. I finally got up the courage and I spoke out loud. "You all do realize that I can hear you speaking at night. I don't mind, but I'm very tired and just want to get some sleep." The voices immediately stopped. In fact, I never heard them ever again. Sadly, my grandmother passed away a few weeks later. I don't know exactly who or what they were, but I know they were not malevolent. Honestly, if anything, it sounded like a family reunion. I have never considered myself very religious. I feel that whatever is outside of this world just exists, and there are many, many possibilities, all valid. I am not searching profoundly for any answers. I figure that the answers will find me someday. Until then, I like to think of this as a positive experience, and it feels so good to tell someone. The Man in the Doorway. It was a mostly normal Wednesday night. My husband and I had just returned home from a fancy dinner. It was the day after Valentine's Day, and we both figured the restaurants wouldn't be as busy as on the 14th. We walked into the house, and my husband, who had worked all day, went straight to bed. I stayed up watching YouTube videos. Around 11:30 that night, someone knocked on our front door, and it sounded like somebody was trying to break in. I went to the door and asked who it was. "Police, ma'am." A chill ran up my spine. This couldn't be good. I told them to hang on a moment and ran upstairs to get my husband. In cases like this, your mind goes to some weird places, and my mind was worried about an articulated human skeleton that we had obtained the previous week and was hanging in our living room close to our front door. I don't know why, but I was worried about the legality of having that in our possession and figured that's why the police were banging on our door. My husband made it downstairs and answered the door, and I peeked out from behind him. He actually asked for me, and when I identified myself, he said, "Ma'am, your mom couldn't remember your phone number, and she wants you to come to her house. Your father is in the hospital." We dressed quickly, hopped in the car, and drove the 5 blocks to her house. We pulled into the driveway. I looked at the front door. It was open. Light from inside was shining through the screen door, and I saw my father standing in the doorway. He was looking at us. I felt a tremendous sense of relief as I saw this figure walk back into the house. I was wondering what all the fuss had been about and thought that the police had brought him home and that everything was okay now. I unbuckled my seatbelt and walked to the door feeling it's okay. I walked into the house and found my mother sitting by herself by the front door, wearing a bathrobe and crying. She choked out the words that Dad was dead. She continued with terrible details of what she had been going through all night. He had suffered a heart attack. The medical staff had been able to get his heartbeat back twice, but couldn't do it a third time. They had removed him from the breathing machine. It had happened, and it was done, and could not be undone. He was dead. Really dead. I didn't say anything about the figure I had seen in the doorway when we pulled up, but I know it had been the figure of my father. I had seen his familiar face with his beard. He was wearing his favorite hat and had his hands in his pockets. The rest of that night is a blur of grief and tears. The next day, when the reality of what had happened really sunk in, I asked my mom if she had gotten out of the chair and come to the door when we arrived the night before. Had she seen us pull up? She looked at me with a strange look on her face and said, "No." She hadn't moved since she had received the news that he had passed. Later, I asked my husband, "What did you see when we pulled up last night?" He answered, "I saw a figure that looked like your dad, and he was wearing a hat." Voices in the dark. I used to be a truck driver. I'm female and drove alone for a period of time rather than as a team. I always hated traffic and would travel at night in the wee hours to avoid that issue. On one very cold night in the mid-90s, around 2 a.m., I was driving my 80,000 pounds worth with a loaded 53-foot trailer behind me on a winding interstate outside of Detroit, and I found myself on solid black ice. I had been driving a truck for a long time and was trained well and knew the best thing to do was make no changes on black ice, don't use brakes, don't change lanes, don't shift up or down, just glide. There was no other traffic out at 2 a.m., no other semis like mine, no cars on the road that I could see, and I realized I was the only one stupid enough to be out on the road and on the ice at this time. But I was on a mission to get from point A to point B with as little traffic as possible. Now, there were 3 lanes, and I was in the far right-hand lane with a concrete barrier down the middle of the highway and another on the right outer edge. The road gently curved and continued that way, and I could not see anything up ahead except the shine of the ice and the curve of the road. I was only going about 35 miles per hour and very aware of the ice beneath me. Suddenly, and keep in mind I was alone in the cab of that truck, I heard a voice, an audible voice, loudly say, "Get in the middle lane now." That voice did not come over my CB radio, but rather was a voice from inside the cab. Rather than wondering how I was hearing that voice, my mind instead jumped to the logic and training of don't make any changes on ice. I stayed in the right lane. Seconds later, I heard the voice again, only louder and very emphatically say, "Get in the middle lane now." I had not heard a voice like this before, and now figured that I had better listen to it. So I decided to move to the middle lane very carefully. As soon as I completed the lane change, it felt like I seemed to stop being in my body. It was like Elvis has left the building. I was aware of what I was seeing, but nothing had any effect on me. I was a zombie at the wheel, almost. Further up the road, well past the line of vision, when I had made the lane change, I became aware of ambulances, police cars in the right-hand lane and in the left, but the middle lane was clear. Apparently, the cars had ricocheted into the concrete barriers and into each other after sliding on the ice, and everyone ended up in the right or left lanes. It wasn't until I had driven on through in the middle lane that Elvis came back to the building, and I was back. I started trembling, and my hands were gripping the wheel, and I really couldn't stop shaking. I was just realizing what had happened, and it was a bit overwhelming. To this day, I have no explanation, and I don't know anyone else who does either. The voice was a man's voice, not one that I recognized, and there was determination in it. That voice saved so many people from being creamed by an 18-wheeler that night. Now, another similar thing happened to me a few years later. I was still driving an 18-wheeler alone, still driving around 2 a.m., and this time I was in southern Texas, headed north, when I hit fog so thick I could not see much in front of me. I was on a state highway, not an interstate, and could only see the broken yellow line below my driver's side headlight, but nothing to the right. It was that thick. Now, I drove like this through the night for what seemed like 12 hours, but it was actually only about 2 hours, only able to go about 15 to 20 miles per hour because of zero visibility. I couldn't pull over anywhere in an 18-wheeler, not knowing what might be on the shoulder of the road, or maybe if there's a shoulder at all. And I couldn't just stop, or someone would plow into me. And I couldn't see if there were any places to exit. I could only keep going, and I was exhausted. Finally, after not seeing any headlights coming, nor any from behind me, I felt very alone out there, and reached up to get the microphone for my CB. I said into it, "Is anyone else out there going through the same heavy fog I am?" I didn't say it with desperation, but more like I had just had enough. Immediately, a voice came through my CB radio and said, "Little darling, you just do what I tell you, and you'll be just fine." It was a man's voice, kind and gentle with a little country twang. This voice started guiding me as if he was sitting right there beside me. Keep in mind that I couldn't even see the right shoulder of the road, but the voice was telling me to curve to the right. Now, curve to the left. And at one point he said, "Be careful not to take the exit right here and stay on the road." This drive with the voice went on for about another 45 minutes when he suddenly said, "Okay, little darling, you'll be fine from here on out, so I'm going to take this exit. You have a good night now." As I started to thank him over the CB, I suddenly broke out of the fog, like a wall had been removed and replaced with a very clear view of the highway stretched out ahead and the twinkling lights of the city about 20 miles ahead of me. I realized I had never seen any headlights behind me or taillights in front of me the entire time, and I still didn't. Later on, I looked at my map, and there were no exits where he said he was taking one and where he told me to have a good night. And how did he know I'd be fine from here on out if he wasn't in front of me to know the fog suddenly cleared? I have no explanation at all for either of these two incidents, but I am happy to have been on the receiving end of that voice each time. This has been another Strange But True Stories, submitted to us by viewers just like you. Do you have a strange story that you would like to share with us? Send it to strangebutTrueStories2@gmail.com. Let us know what you thought of this episode in the comments below, and subscribe if you haven't already. Visit our website, and if you're looking for a cool new hoodie with the change in the weather and would like to help us out a bit, check out our merch at teespring.com and search for Strange But True. More merch is on the way soon. Thanks for watching this video, and again, guys, girls, men, women, boys, and girls that watch these videos from week to week, you are awesome. I'm Steve White. Until next time.